A great time with Roger Hurricane Wilson. I have the coolest guest, you guys. You are going to love this guy. I met him a while back, I don't know, a month or so. And the moment I met him, I'm like, I have to know more about him. Now, when you call yourself Roger Hurricane Wilson, and I'm from Florida, that has meaning to me. That means that your presence has impact. The more I've gotten to know this man, the more that's an accurate name for him. We're going to learn about how he got that nickname, but also we're going to learn about this amazing career he has and how he put it together over all these years and all these decades. See all the cool guitars behind him? He plays those. How cool is that, right? So Roger, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy you're taking your time out of your busy life, because one of the things that really got my attention when I met you was your professional and casual and creative demeanor kind of all coming together. So will you share with us a little bit about the Roger backstory? And I know you have a book out that's your bio and all that, but if you were going to give us a Cliff Note version of how did you get started in music and playing the guitar? I know you were very young, and give us a little Cliff Note version of then till now.
Well, basically, I started playing guitar at 9 years old, and I think I just did it because this kid up the street from me in my little neighborhood was taking guitar lessons, and so I thought, I told my mom, okay, I got to do that. So then I started taking guitar lessons, and I started learning note by note, and after about 3 or 4 years, I could play. I had a stack of books about knee high, and I could go through the motions, and I won a couple little trophies at some recitals and stuff, as a kid. But I really couldn't just play guitar. It was like I could go through the motions. I could open the book and play the notes, and everything was cool. And then my friends were like a rock and roll band in a garage, and they were playing, bar chords and playing Louie Louie and all this other stuff, and I was going, oh my God, so I went to another teacher and learned that, and then I started playing trumpet in the 5th grade elementary school band and did that till the 8th grade, but still kept playing guitar. But then when I was 14, I went away to school in Georgia. And because my little town in New Jersey, where I was originally from, my mom was from Atlanta, and I had relatives there. So my little town didn't have a high school at the time. Now, they had signed to build one, but when I graduated from elementary school, I was going to be bussed around. So my folks said that they wanted to send me to a military school, and I freaked out. But my mom and I had been to Atlanta in the summer of '66 to visit relatives. And so what happened was I freaked out about the military school thing, and I ran around the corner and ran away from home for like an hour. And then I thought about it, and I went back and told my mom and dad, I said, if you will send me to Georgia to go to school, then I'll go. I'll do whatever you want. And I knew it was never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And then I went home and told them that. I said, just send me to Georgia, to Atlanta. And they went, good idea. And then my mom remembered a military school, Georgia Military Academy. They got the catalog and everything, but it had just changed the name had been changed to the founder from 1900 to Woodward Academy. And I went away the next year, and I got in the school band. And then about 3 years later, I'm age 17, and I'm more and more into rock and roll, and I'm just loving music. And I guess my story is I smoke a joint, and I go in and stand 8 feet from Dwayne Almond and an Almond Brothers band concert, and then all bets are off, and here I am.
Wow, that's amazing. So when did you start writing songs? How old were you when you started writing songs? Because I know you write. How did that happen? Because there's one thing to play them and to keep growing in that, but writing them.
Well, first of all, I start teaching guitar. I got a job in '72 before I left Jersey at teaching in a music store, teaching guitar. And the reason I did that, this all leads into the songwriting thing, and I'm going to explain that because I get a job at this little music store, but I had worked at this crappy job in a factory, when it was like I was taking, they were bringing dump truckloads of U.S. government ballpoint pen casings, and they were dumping them out in front of this factory where I was at, and I was taking them in buckets, and I was putting them in a machine and grinding them up, then taking them out and putting them in another machine. And they were coming out. They were turning into those little foam pellets that you pack with, packing foam pellets,
right?
The little marshmallow-looking things.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh my God, what a nightmare! I mean, it was freezing cold. It was dingy. It was grungy. It was raining, pouring rain. Rain was coming in. you know, I looked at the clock. Well, I thought I was like working about 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours. I looked at the clock. It was like 15 minutes. You know, I was going, Jesus, you know, so I knew that was not going to happen. So I ran home that night and I got in the phone book and I started calling a music store in the area, just calling music stores. And I said, you know, and I told them I wanted a job teaching guitar lessons. And the reason I thought that is because I knew that if I got a student, I could teach them the way I learned, note by note, string by string, piece by piece. I'm just going to teach the way I learned how to do it.
Right.
All right. So then I called this music store and a nice lady owned the store. And I went in there that night and she hired me. She said, well, how long have you been teaching? And I said, well, yeah, about 4 years. Oh yeah. That's the ticket. Yeah. 4 years. And she says, well, you seem like a nice, clean cut young man. And we'd like to have you, you know, teach for us. And I'm going, okay, cool. You know, so then here I am, I'm hired, you know, and then a day or two later, I go back for my first student and it's a little 6-year-old girl with a guitar. She's holding it in her hand like this, you know, and they said, okay, Roger, here's your first student. And I'm going, oh my God, here it is, you know? And so then reality set in, but I sat down with her and I taught her, you know, I mean, we worked it out one by one. And then I got a couple more students and a few more students. All right. So I had that job for a while. Then I, you know, went ahead and moved back to Georgia and on the suggestion of somebody else. And I moved in with a guy that had a business teaching. He had an established guitar studio business. All right. So he goes, he didn't really hire me. He just gave me an opportunity. He said, here, you know, you can like advertise, try to get, you know, recruit your own students, you know, advertise with the paper, you know, just network, do what you got to do. And here I am, I'm 19 years old and I'm living in a upstairs room at this place and the studio's downstairs. And so anyway, I started advertising and I started running around the music scene and everything. And I get one student, I started teaching him and I get 2 students, you know, and it's going to be you can tell it's going to be a real fight. But then I got, you know, then one student quits and then 2 more, you get 2 more. So after about, you know, a year or so of just going through the motions of trying to teach people like I learned, this kid came in one day. Nice kid. He had a school uniform on, one of the private schools, something like that. He had a guitar in his hand, you know, in one electric guitar in one hand, and he had a record album in the other. And he didn't know how to play guitar, but he comes in with the record album and the guitar, and he says, "Hey man, how about, you know, show me something on this album?" And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, you don't know how to play guitar yet. I really need to show you some basics. You got to learn." He says, "Yeah, I know. Just show me something I can play, you know, have some fun with." And that was the key to the thing. Was he said, "Have some fun." I don't know why it stuck out, but it did. And I say in my book that I think the record was Led Zeppelin 4. I think it was the song Black Dog, I believe, by Led Zeppelin. And so I had you know, back then, in order to teach, there was no digital, nothing. Everything was on the turntable. You put a record on to learn the lick and you ruin the record. That's how you did it. And so I put the record on there and I'm queuing it up and I'm hitting the lick and I'm going, you know, you know, whatever the lick is, I'm just tuning up to it. And the kid goes, "Yeah, show me that, you know." I'm going, okay. And so I showed to him and he's suffering with it, man, through the whole 30-minute lesson. He's eking it out and he's going, "Yeah, man, I'm going to get it. I'll have it next week. You know, by God, I'm going to, yeah." And he was just, the kid was having a ball. All right. And he got through it. So he leaves anyway. And after he left, he was glowing. It was like a halo around the kid or something. Something was going on. And he walked out and I sat there and I said, "What the hell just happened?" I was, you know, what happened? So anyway, my phone didn't stop ringing for 10 years. Okay. I was the cool guy on the north side of Atlanta also that's teaching you what you want to learn. They were bringing, and I had kids carpooling. One kid would grab his mom and dad's car and there'd be 4 kids in the car with a different record album. And they'd come to me and they'd take their 30-minute lesson and each one would sit out in the lobby out, you know, out there for like an hour and a half working on their licks. And some kid would bring in the Boston album. I think the vinyl wasn't even dry on the sucker yet. Rolling Stones, Peter Frampton, you name it. They were bringing them all in. And I was teaching. So finally it evolved into the years where, you know, I put a band together and I'm playing with some guys, but I'm also going to these kids' recitals and I'm making a living teaching. I mean, and the parents are calling me up and the parents are coming in going, "Thank you." Because I'm keeping their kids off the street. You know, I'm keeping them off. They're going, "Oh, whatever you're doing, please don't stop." I'm going, okay, and I couldn't, and I was 21 years old, and this is happening to me, and I'm thinking, so this is how I build my chops to play, and then I get in some cover bands, right? And we put bands together, and we're all playing cover music. We're 20, 21, 22 years old. We're playing the songs off the radio. We're trying to play Led Zeppelin and Almond Brothers and Leonard Skinner and all that stuff.
Right.
And so now bands are still doing that today, and they call it classic rock. But this is what we were doing in the early days. But it got to a certain point to where, some of these bands, the Almond Brothers band started playing cover music, but somebody said, you need to play your own stuff. Somebody told me, well, you're great at what you do, or, you're good at what you do, and we're having fun and we're playing, but something was not there. And I just started writing some songs, and I made up some stuff. I made up some licks. And so I did a first album. I guess it was in about 76, 77. And about 1978, there was a guy, he was head of NARIS in Atlanta. He's long gone now. He was the old school NARIS. He had a studio. He was head of the Musicians Union, and I think he felt sorry for me or something like that. And he looked like I was not going to have been a tax write-off. And so he cut an album on me, and gave me this bogus contract and all this stuff. And, the album came out and it sounded like crap, and I don't want anybody to hear it, but that was it. But I had original songs on there, and they were rough sound, but I some of them were okay, to where I have still cut some recently on recent CDs. So it was in the 70s when I started writing. So I guess I was, about 21, 22 when I first started writing my own songs. And then, I've never had any real hits or anything, but I've done some stuff that I guess is okay. And I keep doing it,
Oh, that's really cool.
If that answers your question, it was just a big evolution to get to that certain point to want to write songs. And now I, can't stop.
Right. It's like you're open to that well within you when you were 21 or 22. And now, like you said, you just can't stop. It's just coming through you. And that's really fun. Did you ever have time or moments back then when all this was uncovering, where other people would look at you and they didn't understand you or didn't get it, or they judged you, like, why do you want to go into music, and how come you're doing this musician thing, and why don't you get a real job or any of that? Did you have anybody project that kind of sour grapes on you, or were most people around you really into it with you? How was that for you?
Well, I suppose my mom, who was was a big support. My mom and dad supported me. They encouraged me. They probably were looking at me going, like that, but they were still in my corner. And so, well, my mom passed away in 2018. She made it to age 100, and she was a government worker, and she worked for the U.S. Army as a civilian employee. She was very articulate, very smart, just a wonderful lady. She lived life by the book, did everything right. She just was good and very articulate. And she would always tell me, but I was wanting to play music. Once I got out of Woodward Academy, when I graduated in 72, I was ruined. I had to play guitar. That's what I wanted to do. And she knew that. But she was also saying, whether you just get a job with the government, you'll have everything you need. You'll have your pension, and you'll have your insurance, and just get a job with the government. Well, she worked for the U.S. Army at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and she retired from there. And she did it right, and everything was cool. Since then, that same fort that she worked with closed. Okay, but before it closed, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, who I'd been watching while he was playing high schools, rented Fort Monmouth out for a rehearsal before an E Street Band tour. So wow. What happened here was the rock and roll won. The government went away, and the rock and roll took over. And she was she was too far along in dementia for me to tell her this and really realize it. But somewhere along the line, we were on the same page, and we knew something was going to happen. But it's not like I stepped into the music business and made really, you put my name on a marquee and I can't draw flies, really, unless somebody knows what I do. But the fact that happened, it gave me an inspiration to think, well, I think maybe I can continue doing this. And I just have. I just did it and never looked back.
Right. So when you think in general in your life, are you thinking in song and thinking in lyric? I mean, is music like always going in your head somehow, some way, or how does it work on the inside of Roger's head?
Just like you said. Well, it was funny because when I graduated from high school in '72 in Georgia, and I went back to New Jersey for a year. That's when I found the guys in the East Street Band and all the guys, playing around Asbury Park and the Jersey Shore. So I'd already watched the Almond Brothers Band, and Southern music cultivated itself from having listened to Otis Redding early on, and then I'm up north and I'm watching the North thing go on.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out how I was going to connect this here. Well, where were we going with this?
I asked you about you thinking in song and in lyric.
Yeah, okay.
Is that how you think?
All right. Yeah. So anyway, that was all coming together on both parts of the continent. But then I went to college. This is what happened. I went to a community college, and I was in the music program. That's where I was going with this. Sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway, they didn't offer guitar. No places offered guitar. They didn't do this. They just had piano and keyboards and stuff and like that. And so I'm taking a music theory class, and the lady that was the professor, she was great at what she did. She was a classically trained, she was an older lady from me then, very, very nice and very accomplished and very studious and strict, but when you're learning on the piano keyboard in school and you're trying to do this, now my brain is going to think on a guitar fretboard the whole time,
right.
Like I'm thinking about this right here. I'm thinking about the notes that go up and down there and what. So when it came to like learning an interval between two notes, I'm thinking, okay, this fret to that fret. So I'm thinking in a guitar or keyboard instead of a keyboard. But she came up to me at the side of the class, and because so many of the people in there, they weren't even music people. They just were wanting to study music and learn something. So a lot of them didn't even play. There was a few in there. A few crazy ones in there like me that played guitar or did something, but there was some in there that didn't know what was going on. They were just learning the piano and trying to grasp on whatever they could learn. But she took me aside from on the outside. She says, I can really tell that you have an advanced knowledge, of what we're doing here. I'm going, well, so by this time I'm 19 years old, and I'm going, yeah, well, that's possible because I've been playing for 10 years, as far as a kid playing guitar. So yeah, that's how my brain was thinking. And but I was just so flattered that she picked up on that she, recognized that I knew something, which told me, because I didn't know if I knew a damn thing or not. I'm going, okay, well, yeah, maybe I do, and
right.
So that was encouraging. The fact that she did that. She didn't. I mean, she never realized it, but she helped me out by doing that.
And that's one of the things I tell a lot of people is that when we share our gifts, like she was sharing her gift with you and her observation and understanding, that we never know how we're going to touch somebody's heart. We can never know that what we say, like she had no idea the way she touched you, but it's still meaningful all these years later, and you recall it. And so I'm sure a lot of people have that experience listening to your music. Like there's people out there that are moved by some of the things you've brought to the world, and you'll never know. Some people might tell you. So.
But what happened in that class? The other thing that happened in that class. Now that was that part of it. But there was another buddy of mine that became a friend of mine. I met him in the class, and he was a little older than me, but he played guitar, and so we put a band. We put a band together.
Nice.
And we put it together with his brother and a couple of friends. I had been in Georgia for 5 years, so I'm all back new to the New Jersey thing and all that. But we became friends, and we're still lifelong friends now. I mean, they were back in Jersey, and they played with a little local band, but we still keep in touch. It's unbelievable. But we put a little band together, and we started playing around. We're doing and we're doing all cover music. We're doing, me, I was partial to the Almond Brothers Band because I was already raised on them, but we were doing stuff by Poco and Traffic and all these bands that you don't ever hear about anymore. All this cool stuff.
Right.
We had 3 guitars and a drummer, and we sounded pretty good. We really did. And I knew I wasn't going to be there for the long haul, but it was for that first year. But we played a prom, and we played. But the first concert we did was at the college where I was going to school, and we did a Friday night in the rec hall there. And it was probably my first gig really on where I was going to be in front of people. And I see the microphone on the stage there. I'm going, and I'm kind of like scared to death. And it's my first time, one of my first times singing and everything, but I'm playing guitar. There's a picture of it somewhere. It's on my Facebook page of the show, but we had a ball. But I mean, I was scared, but I played Johnny Be Good, man. And I'm rocking. We're just having a great time. Now the next Monday I go back into school again to the music class. Now this time it wasn't the lady that was teaching the class, but it was the head of the music department. And this guy was a classical musician. He was a conductor, and he comes running up to me and shakes my hand going, "Great job Friday night," and I was like going, "Oh my God." Because I didn't think these people cared anything about what we were doing. I thought they didn't care. I thought, well, this is our music and you are that. But they cared about what we did and they complimented it. I was like blown away by that,
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. It was just amazing. Because I didn't think I had. Maybe I just didn't have any self-esteem or something, or I didn't. I don't know. I didn't know if I was any good. And I really didn't care if I was any good or not. It was just so much damn fun to play guitar that I know we sounded like crap going in, but it was so much fun that we did it. And that's how that worked out. But the fact that these educated people were complimenting me on my ability, and they didn't know they were doing that, but they did.
Yeah, that's really huge, But see, I think you brought up a good point too, is it didn't really matter except you had to have fun. You were having fun. And I really believe that when we're in our craft, whatever it is, and we're letting ourselves have fun, that something more amazing comes out than we think, than our brain can think. And so those people heard the amazing thing that was the outpicturing of your fun.
Well,
and they loved it.
It was that. Because I played guitar because I loved playing guitar, and I didn't care if anybody was listening or not. That's just the way. And that's really kind of the way. I guess it's kind of the way it still is. But now with the technology and what we have, I can make music and put it out there, and I'm hitting more radio stations now around the world than I ever did. Staring through a windshield 60,000 miles a year. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah, it's really great.
Who knew?
Right. So you mentioned a lot of rock and roll bands in the 70s, which now they call classic rock. And I say lovingly that I have mid-70s syndrome because it's my favorite music from the 70s. I love all of it. My mother was a classically trained classical pianist. And so I have a great appreciation for that in jazz. She played really great jazz. But I still love mid-70s music. And so you play a lot of blues. So how did blues weave its way in, or was it always kind of there?
Well, it was always. Any historian or musician that's come along will tell you that it was always there. We always were listening to blues and we didn't know it.
Right.
The Rolling Stones were the ones that were really introduced it back to us. People like, and then a lot of the early English musicians, the early Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green, Alexis Corner, a lot of these cats in England. The British guys are the ones that grabbed onto it. They knew what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. But you go back and listen, excuse me, you listen to some old Cream albums, and you listen to like some early Cream albums, and you'll hear you hear some Albert King licks. If you listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan, well, you're listening to Albert King. You're hearing all this influence from way back,
right?
And somehow it transcended, and we didn't know that. We thought we were listening to like acid rock, or just listening to the guitar, or whatever. It was just rocking out, but there was a subtle groove in there, and gradually it started coming through. And bands like Cream, they took Albert King's "Born Under a Bad Sign" and did a version of it, but nobody knew it was an Albert King song. It just thought it was Cream, but it was a cool song. And then, of course, the Animals were doing like John Lee Hooker songs way back in the '60s, and so we were infiltrated with it, but we didn't know it. And so later on, it just. I guess acts like, for instance, B.B. King would be on the Johnny Carson show a whole lot. You know,
Right.
so that was the visibility he had. So there wasn't a lot of visibility of it, but there was a cult following, you know, for it, and it came out in a lot of the blues and, you know, the folk festivals. You had guys like a lot of the Delta guys like Mississippi John Hurt and all these unheard of, you know, wonderful musicians, and somehow there were purists that went back and dug them out and brought them out, and it kind of just transcended into, you know, learning about Robert Johnson. Mm-hmm. And I guess the way it happened for me, when I say I didn't know, you know, I didn't know my head from whatever as far as where it came from, but I love the music, and it goes back to the Dwayne Almond and the Almond Brothers band, the early band. Now they were playing all these blues songs, and the slide guitar was ripping, and it was just and the groove was like in Statesboro Blues. You had the shuffle thing going on, and we're just sitting there going, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" You know, we didn't know. All right, so then in October, my senior year of high school, I was the drum major in the high school band. I grew about 3 feet in a few years, so the band director made me the drum major, and I'm conducting the Star Spangled Banner on a high school football game before a game. It was the same day that Dwayne Almond passed away from a motorcycle accident back in October of '71. And that kind of devastated me because I'd already been starting to dig, and the guy was only 24 years old, but I was already starting to dig into the stuff. Okay, so you figure a year later, the Dwayne Almond Anthology album comes out. Now, this is just from my perspective. There's a lot of people out there that knew a lot more than I did, but this is the way it hit me. So the album comes out, and there's a big insert, a big paper insert, biography and a story about Dwayne Almond. It's got some pictures of him playing. You know, he was playing with Wilson Pickett and doing sessions with Aretha Franklin at Muscle Shoals before, you know, I ever knew that. But once I read about him, and I'd already seen him play, was already knocked out by his playing. I'm reading in there, and he's talking about Robert Johnson. He mentioned the name Robert Johnson, and it said something about, well, his eyes would light up when he would talk about Robert Johnson. I'm going, okay, Robert Johnson, who the hell is that? I got to figure this out. And then Elmore James, you know, another Chicago blues man. You know, then he's talking about Blind Willie McTell, which was a Southern 12-string acoustic player that wrote Statesboro Blues. So you're talking about, so here's three guys, and then he's talking about T-Bone Walker. So he's talking about these four guys, you know, that inspired him, blues guys that are household names today, but they weren't then. And so I'm thinking, okay, I got to remember who these guys are, and I wrote them down. And I went to a record store, and I found collections. Here I am, so I'm 19 years old, and I'm going to a record store, and I'm finding these collections of Blind Willie McTell, T-Bone Walker, Elmore James, and Robert Johnson. Now these are old recordings. Mm-hmm. So to my young ear back then, I put it on the radio, I put it on the turntable, and I'm playing the record, and I hear Robert Johnson, Crossroads, right? Now it sounds nothing like what Eric Clapton did to it, and what Eric Clapton did to it, he even regrets what he did to it. But it sounded nothing like that. It was just an old recording, but you could hear him singing, and you could hear the guitar, but I couldn't decipher quite yet. I can now, but I'm walking around with, I got 4 albums under my arm. I'm going, okay, I can't hear any of it, but I know it's in here. You know,
it's in here somewhere. I know it is.
It's in there. I'm 19 years old, and I'm walking around with 4 blues albums under my arm of these guys. But now but the influence from a lot of the rock and roll we were hearing came from these albums that I'm talking about. And so I just started digging into it. And so the other thing that helped my ear, because I was teaching for so many years, going back from the kid bringing the record in, right?
Right.
So finally, it was for so many years, the kids are bringing the records in, and I'm putting them on the turntable, and I'm making cassette tapes of each song they bring in, and pretty soon I have a whole wall full of songs that I'm the guy that could put a record on and show them the song. This was my development of sitting down every day, day in and day out, doing this. And I was like I said, I was the cool guy in North Atlanta because there was a couple guys around the corner. One guy had been teaching for like 40 years, and everybody couldn't stand him because he was doing the same thing for 40 years. And there was another guy that was teaching. He didn't know what he was doing. He was teaching like somebody had to strum a chord, and that was it. But, you know, and so I was just doing, but I was doing all I knew how to do, and it took off. And so building from the teaching, from building the chops to learning to write the songs to going back and pulling out the old names and figuring out where the history comes, how it gets there, and how you get from there to here. And now there's all kinds of documentaries about it, and there's blues in the schools courses, and there's a lot of history now to choose from, and a lot of ways to to find it and figure it out.
Right, that's really neat. I remember my mom telling me a lot about blues being underneath everything, and
yeah.
And so I remember from when I was younger, and I've talked about it with other people before. So I wanted to find out like how you got there. And I love that story because you're young and you knew it was there. So you dug into it because you have a lot of tenacity. That's what I heard in that story was I'm focused, I have tenacity, and I'm going to uncover this. And that's just the way it is. And I love that mentality. So here's a cool question. It's popping in my mind. If we could bring back your 19-year-old self and have him hanging out sitting next to you now, what would your current day self tell that young man? Having lived all the life you've had and all these experiences, what would you tell your 19-year-old, curious, amazing, focused, going to play guitar no matter what self? What would you tell him?
Probably just don't be an idiot. I mean,
don't be an idiot.
It goes back to I'm trying to figure this out as you asked me. And I told you that I played guitar because it was fun, and I really never cared. I really never cared about whether anybody was listening or not. But when they listened, and then when we got pretty good, playing in a band or doing what we did, it can go to your head. A lot of times it can, that's the biggest thing. Like it can go to your head, and that's just not good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being proud of what you do and everything. And so there might have been a time out there when, when I was teaching, I was great because I was all absorbed in learning the music and passing it on to whoever was sitting next to me at the lesson, that kind of thing. But then a lot of times maybe you get out on stage and you think maybe you're a little better than you are, and and that also led into the somebody buying you a drink, and it led into the thing that escalated into alcoholism later on, which was a problem. And then I just turned 68 yesterday, but at age 30,
Happy birthday.
I pretty much thank you, but at age 30, I was pretty much hit rock bottom, and basically. I didn't really understand why, because all I wanted to do was play my guitar. But all of a sudden, I'm in this web of I don't know. It just wasn't good. It was not a good place to be, and it was painful. But so if I could tell my younger self, don't drink. That would be one thing. For sure.
Don't get caught in that web. Don't get caught in that web, so you don't have to come out of it, right? That's good.
And I never did drugs or anything. I mean, we smoked a bunch and all that stuff, but I never did any of that other stuff. I mean, I didn't do it. But I guess it's when you get accolades and some people are all about being famous. Like that. That's a lot of people want to do that. They want to get on YouTube. They want to be famous. Now, all I cared about was making a living and not starving to death and having a roof over my head. So that's why I was able to, to survive. I didn't want to be living under a bridge and trying to hustle a gig or something. I didn't want to do that. So the biggest thing I would say, and I even had a student once that came in, and I think I realized that now this was probably about the time I was 21 or 22, and I had this young kid, and he, believe it or not, nowadays, I'm not going to say who he is, but he was a really good guitar player, really good. And he came out, but he was kind of a cocky little guy, and I could hear him clumping up the stairs when he was coming to my studio, and he was like one of these kind of guys that was just kind of like all over the place, like, hey, yeah, man, all right, and he had a little electric guitar, and he was wanting to play some, he played some stuff. I was showing him some Chuck Berry licks, and, he wasn't bad he was just a little kid. He was a few years younger than me. Probably 6 or 8 years, I guess. But he was just a kid at the time. I mean, hell, I wasn't much older than that. So he's really a kid, and I'm showing him some stuff, and he was picking it up, and you could tell that he actually had perfect pitch. I mean, he could do it. He was capable of, but he had this little cocky attitude about, he asked me, he says, hey man, you have any other students as good as me? You know? And I went, and this was a lesson for me too. Okay. At the time. And I said, man, boy, I went, man, I got really, I said, what did you just say? I said, shut up. You know, I said, don't ever say that again. I said, you're the worst student I've got. Don't ever say that again. Play that, you know, right there, you know. And he was, all of a sudden he's like just about to cry. I mean, he's sniffing and, you know, like that. And I said, knock it off and play that music, you know. And I mean, I was giving him the tough love thing, you know.
Right.
So we finished the lesson up, and he goes, and he says to me, he says, am I really your worst student? I said, not necessarily, but I said, you don't ever say that. You don't ever do that again. I said, I don't care what you do, but don't ever do that again. All right. Don't ever say that. You do what you can do. There's always going to be somebody better than you that can come along. There's always going to be somebody that's not as good as you. So don't ever take that attitude again. He never did. And and it was kind of a lesson for me at the same time, you know, to do that. So,
right.
Then later on, years later, and I tried to maintain that. You know, sometimes I might have gotten a little, you know, out there, but I tried to maintain that kind of attitude myself.
Right.
And I know it didn't always work. There's people probably that think that, you know, that I'm the farthest from that. But later on, that when I was in the broadcast business, and I worked for, you know, I was in radio for years. I still am, but I worked for CNN for 10 years, the old CNN, back when Ted Turner used to sign my check. I was there from 86 to 96 during the first Gulf War and the Iran-Contra hearings and the OJ trial, all that stuff, when live news was starting to take off, and CNN was the only network out there. And so there was a good friend of mine, the weather guy from the early days there, and we're sitting in the break room one day. And this guy he was great. These guys are just all journalists and weather people and meteorologists and everything. And we're sitting there having coffee one day, and my buddy's talking, and he's a weather guy. And he looked at his watch and he goes, "Oh, I got to run." So we're sitting there talking like we are now, you know. And he just runs into the studio, gets in front of the green screen, clips the mic on, you know, does the weather report, and I said, "Oh yeah, the weather's going to be doing this." And I'm watching him on the monitor after he ran out of the break room, and it's the same guy on TV that's talking the weather, that's sitting here having coffee. And then, you know, the weather thing gets off, and he comes back, and then he comes back in the break room and sits back down having a cup of coffee. Now here's the same guy that's talking to me having a cup of coffee that ran out of the room to go up on the TV screen to do the weather. The same guy, he didn't act any different. You know, there's some guys out there that they're like, right. And then all of a sudden the camera hits, and they're you know, Mr. Sunshine. You know, there are different people. There's the on-air people and the off-air people. You know,
right.
This guy was on the air, off the air. It didn't matter where he was. He was the same guy. And I asked him when he came back. I said, "Man," I said, "you were just sitting here. We were having coffee, and you ran in there and did that weather cut in. And you're this," and I was watching, and I'm going, "That's the same guy that was just sitting right here. He didn't act any different at all. He didn't act any different than when on the air than when he was sitting here." And he came back in, and it was the same guy that how'd you do that? And he says, "I'll tell you why." He says, "Because it's just not that damn important." You know? Yeah. I mean, to be famous, to be something you're not, or he says it's just not important. So that's why I've always kind of frowned on the trying to be famous kind of thing. But what is being famous? What's that going to do for you? I'd rather just make a living and do what I do and be content with it, and you know, and have it going on.
Well, too, I think that kind of authenticity and just being real and being ourselves and not having an on switch and off switch attracts the right people to us, because I think people appreciate that, you know, like you appreciated the way he was. And and I think it's just a natural thing. So what would you tell somebody who's listening to you, who's maybe already plays guitar a little, but maybe has a secret desire to play, but they're feeling kind of stuck, or they don't know where to start? What would you say to that person listening to us right now?
That doesn't know where to start, you mean? I just got a text from my son, so I'm having to deal with this here. Sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of stuck like, oh, this sounds interesting. And maybe I want to pick my guitar back up, or maybe I even want to start learning these kinds of things. Like, I'm feeling kind of motivated from this guy. Like, where would you tell them to get started if their curiosity is piqued by what you're saying? Because I think what you're saying is fascinating. So what would you tell that person?
You talking about somebody that has played before and is discouraged, you mean? Or
maybe, or feels stuck, like they have an idea and they're not sure where to start.
I guess the first thing you got to do is just pick up the guitar. I mean, that's the first thing, and hit a couple of notes and see what happens. There was
have fun. Probably you'd tell them to have fun.
Well, there was always a thing about John Prine. A story that I heard about John Prine. Because he was such a wonderful songwriter, probably one of the best that ever was, according to many, and I don't disagree with that. He just would hit a chord on the guitar and go, "Well, I'll be darned." I mean, it would just be that, and then a song would come out or something. I don't know. It's really hard. I think if you try to analyze it too hard, then it gets hard. But sometimes it's really kind of the simplest thing is just like, I'll sit here. I've got all these guitars behind me, and I don't know which one I'm going to play at a certain time. I use the gold one as a vintage guitar that I don't take it on the road anymore, but I record with it here. So that's one that I use, and I've got my recording place where I can, a couple of songs in mind. I'm sort of in a dry spell right now, but I've got a whole album of stuff I haven't released yet that I can still work on. And then sometimes something new might come out of that. So pick it up and start playing, and make sure you just have fun, and then see where it leads you, which makes perfect sense to me. I think if you try to have any kind of bigger aspirations than that, then you get, I don't know, then that's when you get stuck.
Yeah, you can get in your ego and get stuck. So where did the name Hurricane come from? We only got a couple more questions that I have lined up for you, but I'm curious about Roger Hurricane Wilson. So where did Hurricane, how did that happen? Were you like a Tasmanian devil hurricane type dude, or did it come from another way?
No, there's a good story to that. And there is a whole chapter in my book about that. But what happened was, and I told you, like back in Atlanta, in Georgia, I was playing around the Southeast for a long time. I mean, I was playing joints, we're playing a lot of covers and stuff with original songs thrown in. And there was a friend of mine that he was a producer. He's still doing some stuff. Great guy named Alec, and he had a record label, his own record label called Hot Tracks Records. And he knew me for a long time. He had a booking agency at one time, and he came out to one of my gigs back in the 80s. And he knew me forever. And he said something about like he told me, he said, I've seen you playing around Atlanta. I was the kind of guy that was playing 5 nights a week in town. Nobody cares, They can say, "Oh, I can see him anytime." Like you burn yourself out. You play too many places. People get tired of seeing you. They don't want to, and that happens. And so but I didn't care because I just like playing guitar. So I'm going to play everywhere I can. And that was my attitude of it. But he told me, he said, "Man," he says, "you really gotta go national. You gotta be out there." And so he decided to do my first CD with me. And I had a little band together that I was playing. And after I had basically gone into the 12-step program, and I'm no longer having the drinking problem and all this other crap that was going on, which was just an unfortunate sideline that happened along, that got in the way. But I had a little band called Roger Wilson and the Low Overhead Band. And that's because it was a 3-piece band that was cheap and easy to move, and I could go in for, whatever a club owner could afford, and I could play. And that was it. It was kind of just something to do. And but I wrote a bunch of songs during that time that I've actually redone later on. And I put out a cassette tape. This is before CDs were just starting to hit. And so I did an actual cassette tape. But anyway, he took me to the studio, and we did the first album called Hurricane Blues. But I wasn't Hurricane then. But we went on the road, and we were heading to Washington, D.C. Back in the summer of I think it was 92, and we were out doing a little short tour, and so Alec and the drummer are riding in his car, and I'm in my pickup truck, and I'm pulling the equipment trailer. And we didn't have, the cell phones. You couldn't talk back and forth, then, because it was $1 million a minute back in those days. But it was, but we had a radio station on in somewhere in North Carolina, and they were playing some great stuff. They were playing this old beach music, shag music kind of stuff, and some blues, and they were mixing all this great stuff in. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and they had the station on, and we pulled over to get gas, and they're going, "Hey man, did you hear that station?" And I'm going, "Yeah, I got it on, man. They're great," And they were somewhere in North Carolina, and we decided to call them up. And back then, we went to a payphone, and called the guy up at the station, right. And we told them who we were, what we were doing, and all I had with us, didn't even have a full CD out. All we had were some basic tracks of the first CD that was going to come out in '94. But we called him up, and the guy was really cool. He says, "Yeah, man, come on by, come up by the radio station." So we go to the radio station, and the guy's in there, and he's playing all these records, in the afternoon, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And so we get in there and talk to him, and he's got my name. It's Roger Wilson, obviously, and we didn't say the Loverhead Band or whatever it was, but we were on the air for like 30 minutes. We played some cuts. We're cutting up and talking back and forth like we are here. Same kind of deal, just loose, having a blast.
Right.
The end of the session on the air, he has my material right in front of him, and he says, "Well, for the last 30 minutes here, we've been on the air with Roger Miller." Right.
No.
And I'm having to text my son. Sorry. So it was like, I've been called worse. I've been. There's nothing wrong with how you gonna. You screw the guy's name up, but he didn't even think about it. He didn't even flinch. He just like Roger Miller, and closed the book and said, "Hey man, thanks for coming by, man. Great, thank you for having us." And I'm like, so I'm sitting there going, okay, what am I gonna do here? There's nothing I can do about it. The guy screwed my name up, and that's okay. I guess it was okay. But we walk outside, and I look at Alec, and he's considerably older than me and more experienced in the music business. He's producing my first CD, and he's over there. I look at him, and you remember the movie Clockwork Orange when the guy's over there going like that?
Yeah.
You can see he was about ready to hammer it. He was just angry, and I said, "Man, what's wrong with you?" And he says, "Man," he says, "that made me madder than you can even possibly think about." I said, "What?" What are you going to do about it, man? There's nothing you can do. He says, "Yes," yeah, but by God, you need a moniker. You need something that's going to separate you. You need something that's going. I'm going, yeah, okay, whatever. I've been. By this time, I'm burnt out. On the whole music business anyway, and that's like 30 years ago. So I'm thinking like, okay, that's cool. So we get back into our vehicles and we start driving. We get into that. We got a gig a day or two later in DC, and we get to our hotel that night, and so I'm in my room, and Alec comes down the room, and he walks in. He says, "Man, I got it." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "From now on, you Roger Hurricane Wilson." I said, "Okay." And I said, "How does that come about?" He says, "Well, look," he says, "Man, I've been watching you for all these years, playing in these joints, one after another." And of course, when I was working at CNN, I'd leave and I'd go out of town and I'd go do a gig and then I'd be back. I was pulling off insane kind of things,
Right.
So he also knew about when I was a little kid, when I was 7 years old, my town in New Jersey was wiped out by Hurricane Donna in 1960.
I remember that hurricane. Yep.
Yeah. So that was that hit Florida first and came up into the Northeast. That's the one, and it beat us to death. I mean, it really did. It wasn't as bad as Hurricane Sandy, but Hurricane Sandy, there's a lot more technology and a lot more warning about it. Back then, there was no warning. You just got your ass kicked, and that was it.
Yeah,
we had a foot of water in the house, and the whole thing. I was in the second grade, and it kind of tore me up a little bit. So, but then he said between playing all these joints and getting in and out fast, and coming, between that, he says Hurricane was a good moniker. And I'm going, yeah, okay. But anyway, beside that point, they started calling me that. And I had no choice. I mean, they go, hey, Hurricane, all right, and it just, and they started running it around, and it stuck. And
yeah.
And we ran with it, And people
I
said,
love that story.
How'd you get the name? I said, well, I'm only Hurricane when I get paid. That's what I took. But I got that from George Burns, because one time George Burns, when he was doing the movie Oh God back in the 70s,
yeah,
he was doing an interview somewhere, and somebody asked him, said, well, George, what do we call you? We call you George, or we call you God? And he goes, I'm only God when I get paid. So I thought it was kind of funny.
Oh yeah, that's a great story. I love that. I lived through Hurricane Donna down in Florida, the Florida part of it.
Yeah.
So everybody, you're listening to Roger Hurricane Wilson, and he's a blast, right? And so we're going to put links to his website and all kinds of things. And if you go on his website, you will find his bio and all kinds of music. He's got a book out, all kinds of things. Like, I've been following him ever since I met him, and I just love your music, Roger. Thank you for blessing the world with your talent and your gift. So is there anything?
I hope I didn't talk too much, but once you open the floodgate.
No, you didn't talk too much at all.
I'm out there.
No, it's no problem. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about, or do you feel done, or where are you? No,
I like, I appreciate it if I'm able to really explain what when you ask me a question, if I can, elaborate on it, I guess that kind of makes it a little bit easier sometimes. Sure. The main thing, I appreciate it. If I do something, I record it and I put it out there and somebody likes it. That just means a lot to me. That's all there is to it. I'm not worried about, I'm really not concerned with, at this stage of my life, I'm not concerned about being famous, and I'm not really out hustling gigs anymore. It gets to be when you're young in the business, you're out trying to scope up everything you can. You're trying to get every gig you can. You're trying to get every deal you can. You're trying to get everything. You're trying to get it. You're just trying to get what you can get out of it. And later on, you just go, man, I'm tired of trying to get stuff, and then you got to think about what you're going to leave behind. And that's really more about it now than anything else.
Right. So
I'm sure there's other things I can think about to talk about, but I don't know. I think we've hit a lot.
Yeah, I think we hit a lot. And I think it's important that you mentioned the whole idea of legacy and that what are you leaving behind? Because I talk about that a lot with all my people. So here's your assignment, everybody who's listening. You heard Roger just say it really means a lot if you listen to something that he does and you like it. So when you hear something he does, because I know you're going to check him out on the show notes after hearing this interview, then if you really like it, and it has to be the truth and honest, let him know somehow. Comment on it, do something, because it really matters. You've heard it more than once in this interview that, sometimes our kind word goes a lot further than we realize. So just his music goes a lot further than he realizes. So let's kind of let that energy flow between all of us. What do you think? So
I appreciate that. I love having people go to my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com, Roger Wilson Guitar. And being on the YouTube channel is where it's at these days. The other thing I was going to mention to you also, how in this generation, a lot of us are saying of our age or my age, whatever, they're saying, well, the music's just not like it used to be. It's not, it's just not the same as it was when we were coming along. But what that entails, and I got this from knowing Stevie Van Zandt of the E Street Band, which he runs a website and an educational thing for schools called rockandrollforever.org. And he's making all these beautiful curriculums for schools, for teachers to put in the history of music, of rock and roll and music, how it came along. So what happened in our generation, and what he says, and I'll close out with this. Basically, when we were coming along, the best music in the world was made between 1951 and 1971. It was wonderful art. I mean, we're talking about people like Otis Redding and Sam and Dave and Young Rascals and all these great bands. You can just name band after band, song after song. But the thing about it is that it was a wonderful art, but it was commercial. And so when we turned the radio on in our younger days, we heard this great music, and that's how we got it. If we hadn't been in our face when we turned the radio on, we wouldn't have heard it. So that was the advantage that we had and that's why everybody says, oh man, all that great music, well, it was all commercial at the time, and it was good music because a lot of it was being pioneered. Now, everything that you're going to hear about that from then on is going to be inspired from a lot of that, and some of it's good and some of it's, not so good, but it is what it is. But it came from probably those 20 years, and that encompasses people like Hank Williams and Elvis and all these other people that came along the way, opening the doors for everything that came along later on. Then it got corporate in the 70s and 80s and everything, and of course,
it keeps changing.
Music business is, and that's kind of where it's at. But that's why our generation was basically reared on what we had, and it was great because it was right at our fingertips. Right.
Oh yes, totally. So all those links will be in the show notes. So you can follow Roger on YouTube, which I've already done, and also on Facebook, because it's really fun when you stream live some of your music. I really, really enjoy it. And so I have one final question for you before we close. And that is, if we were going to put a billboard up that the whole world was going to see with Roger Hurricane Wilson's quote for everyone to see, what would be on that billboard?
Maybe, I don't know, what is old made new again or something. I don't know.
I love it when it's old made new again. That's great. I love that, Roger. Well, thank you for being on the show with us today and sharing all your enthusiasm and fun, your stories, your wisdom. I'm inspired by spending this time with you, and thank you for taking this time out the day after your birthday. So happy birthday.
Thank you. I loved it. I really did.
Cool. Well, remember, everybody, to keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you're a rock star. You're here on purpose with a purpose. So go out there and as Roger says, have fun and just enjoy your life, because that, my friends, is where our passion lies, in that fun. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.